Hello, folks. Welcome to the second edition of the Mental Health Podcast. I'm excited to introduce Sarah uh, as my second guest and would love to hear her thoughts on this. So, here we go. Hey, Sarah. Welcome to the Mental Health Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, as part of this conversation, the first thing that I'd like people to do is you know, give themselves an elevator pitch, do a quick intro about what they're doing and like how they want to showcase themselves and uh, everything that goes with it. So, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and I love having the opportunity to talk a little bit more about my mental health journey. Some background on me. I currently work in real estate in as an operations analyst. That's
Hmm.
my full-time role. On the
Okay.
side, I'm really passionate about venture capital and startups and have several part-time roles.
Hmm.
Really love meeting with founders and just getting to learn more about their journeys.
All right. Sounds like you have a lot going on.
Yes.
Uh, okay, so I'll dig a little deeper now. So, when you say mental health, what are the things that do come up in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, when I first think of mental health, I think of, how healthy is your mind? How are you able to take breaks? How are you able to take your mind off and really relax outside of work?
Hmm.
I'm really passionate about, startups and VC, and I really like real estate. But, when I think about mental health, it's how can you take breaks outside of what you're doing
Hmm.
in your work life, whether that's going to exercise, watching YouTube, spending time with friends. It's just really how are you taking care of yourself and
Okay,
ensuring that you have that balance.
nice. That's great. So, I think the first hassle, into sort of delving into mental health is, that stigma that, uh, regarding asking for help. So, can you sort of tell me how you sort of got involved into like looking into yourself in terms of, finding out like what was it that, your mind really was trying to communicate with you? So, can you give me a little insight into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think growing up, I was kind of realizing that I was very different, not just from like the mental health standpoint, but just for like who I was, like my drive, my love of working and just, really working hard to really achieve my dreams. But I don't know if it was middle or high school, but I just started, having a lot of pain like in my lungs and I didn't know what it was. And then I realized, oh, this is anxiety. And so that was kind of where I first had that like diagnosis and really understanding more about what's going on. And so I think that's kind of how I got into the space and really trying to figure out this is just something I have, but I'm not going to let that affect my goals in my life.
That's so great. And, you can sort of voice your opinion, and you being here in itself, I feel like it's such a huge inspiration for people and your own peers. So, thank you again for like joining in and, being part of this conversation.
Absolutely.
And so, the other aspect that I also see is like there are misconceptions, right, regarding asking for help. Uh, you know, um, what are some of the things that you hear people say when you want to talk about mental health or like have more conversations along this?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think there's a ton of misconceptions, unfortunately, and I think it really depends on the person and how they've been brought up. But I think a common misconception is that it's bad if you need to go to a therapist. And I think that's really unfortunate because, I've like gone to therapy before and it's actually been extremely helpful. And I think, recently I've started, kind of talking more about my journey and kind of showing, hey, it's okay to be open. Like there's nothing wrong with telling people what you're going through because it actually shows that, you're human. Everyone has something they're dealing with. And I think it's just trying to show people that, this is something that's okay. And it's actually like it should be respected that you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so simple and it sounds so easy when, people talk about this, but, I personally have dealt with a lot of, pushback, in terms of, asking for help. And, it's great to hear another person sort of voice similar concerns as well. Um, and then, the next thing that sort of comes up is like, I know, there is this aspect of mental health. I know there is this aspect of self-care, but where do I get started, right? So what would your answer be to that question?
Sure. I would say, first of all, it takes a lot of time. And I think it's unfortunate that there's not like an easy answer. But for me, I graduated college last year. I started living on my own for the first time. And I think with all the time I had to just really explore about myself and figure out who I was, I think I started to learn more about what I needed, to become a better person in the sense of my mental health. And I'm not saying it's, I'm fully like everything's fixed, but it's like I've been able to make a lot of progress because I didn't have like it wasn't like in college where I was always busy, I was always doing something. Like I was forced in a good way to really understand myself because you're just you have a lot of free time. At least for me, I had a lot of free time just to kind of learn. And it was kind of nice.
Right. Yeah. I think you are right in that aspect that, self-care is not a general thing, and, everybody sort of deals with it in their own way. For me personally, I used to go out into nature, do a lot of backpacking, a lot of hiking, and I didn't realize at the time, but, I was doing therapy without realizing I was doing therapy. Um,
Absolutely.
and I definitely encourage people to sort of go out into nature, and there's a lot of positive energy out there, and, people don't realize the impact of just being in the greenness of it all, and, it gives you a lot back. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, you know, I guess we've touched upon different aspects now, like in terms of self-care, in terms of, approaching mental health. In terms of therapy itself, like how have you seen the experience, and like what would your advice be in terms of people looking to find new therapists?
Sure. So for me, I don't know how many different therapists I've gone through, but I know my first, I think it was first was it was either middle school or high school when I first started seeing a therapist, probably high school, but I think the challenge was when I first started seeing a therapist, it wasn't by myself, it was with my parents in the room. And honestly, that made it quite difficult because I couldn't fully open up.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point where I finally got to do therapy on my own, just one-on-one. It was so different. It was really nice. I will say trying to find a good therapist is just so hard. You don't know if it's going to work until until you have a meeting. And honestly, right now, like I'm actually in the middle of transition period. And I think it's okay to normalize, like, you may not, your therapist, like I got a new therapist when I moved, and it unfortunately didn't work out, and that was hard to accept. But I
Mm-hmm.
think you have to recognize if something doesn't work, you should move on. And it's about taking care of yourself, and the therapist will understand.
Wow, yeah, that's great. And I was speaking to Nancy previously, and she said, therapist is more like dating at times, wherein like,
Absolutely.
you may not find the right fit, and you're allowed to break up with your therapist as well. I think that was something that I wanted to say, and like, it is a kind of loss that you have to sort of deal with as well in its own way, and um, I think, that this is something that is hard to sort of comprehend at times. So, thank you for normalizing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I listened to Nancy's session as well, and I completely agree with her. Like it is like dating, and it was really hard to actually say, okay, this isn't working, but everyone I talked to about it said, hey, that's great that you actually did that. So yeah, very happy to normalize it.
All right. So in terms of like resources, right? Like how do people sort of, understand themselves better or like, do the initial sort of research? So can you give people some tips or advice on like how they would want to sort of look stuff up on the internet or like, anything else that you found that's been really helpful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of another unfortunate thing is it's really hard to find good resources. I've spent a lot of time searching, reading articles, articles designed to explain more about anxiety, explain more like how do your friends help deal with it? How does like your boyfriend or girlfriend help you deal with that? Like different
Right.
things like how can you help other people help you in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I would recommend is like journaling. I don't do it actively, but there was a point where when I was really stressed, I
Mm-hmm.
started just journaling. And it is sometimes helpful just to look in yourself and figure out what do I want help with? How can
Right.
I improve? That's the main resource I would recommend.
Oh, great. Yeah. I mean, like, I think for me, for the longest time, sitting and writing about something was so hard because I didn't know what it is that I was writing. And, the other thing is like, it that sort of self which keeps asking you, like, is this good enough? Or like, whatever is you're writing, does it make sense? And then I realized, I'm not writing this for anybody else. I'm writing this for myself. And it doesn't matter what I write, because, it's not like I'm trying to pass a test or like, clear an exam by doing this. So, yeah, it was really some eye-opening to be able to journal without sort of having that expectation of like, getting something good out, on paper. So,
Sure. No, I was the same way. I think at first I was being very judgmental of myself. I was trying to understand why, what am I trying to say? How do I make this sound perfect? And then realizing it's just your thoughts. It's just, it doesn't have to be perfect. And so I think that's also helpful as someone who is a perfectionist. I think it's helpful to recognize.
great. Uh, so, you've been wonderful, Sarah. I mean, like it's been really eye-opening. So, the last thing that I like to ask people is like, if there is one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Sure. Let me think about that. I think one thing I would say is to really prioritize your mental health, um, even when it's hard. And I guess what that means is just really taking the time to actively prioritize that. So whether that's, like I said, taking a break, watching YouTube, going outside. You talked about being in nature. I love going outside, and I think that's really important. I think also just recognizing that things take time, and that's something I'm still accepting myself.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, I think one thing that I've, sort of realized along the way is that, things don't, I don't know, just fall into place as easy as, people talk about it, or like, it's not as easy as uh, sometimes people make it seem. And I also feel like, you have to give yourself that time. And one of the things that I've loved people saying is that, you've taken a lot of time to fall into, your own patterns, and it takes time to sort of fall out of them. So yeah, I mean, that I felt was like the best advice that I've gotten. Um, so, uh, in terms of like, mental health, I know I said that was the last question, but I realized that we still have some time, and I've just been rushing along. So, that just a couple more questions.
Yeah,
Then,
absolutely.
so in terms of mental health, right? So, how do you sort of have conversations, or do you know of people that you have conversations with on a day-to-day basis, or like on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? Do you how do you go about sort of building those conversations? I mean, I'm okay to sort of understand, if people have those kind of people in their lives. So, and this would be really helpful for people who don't as well. So that's the reason why I ask. So,
Sure. I think it's a great question. I think for me, I've got, a really great support system. I think for a long time it was definitely hard to talk about because I wasn't very open with everyone. And I think now that as I've been having more time to think, and like I talked about reflecting on my own, I've really made it a mission to tell more people about what I'm going through. So I think, one thing that I've definitely been looking for, and I think is also helpful if you don't have that support system, is looking for like group therapy. And it's something I've heard of and want to try. But
hmm
being able to talk to other people who are going through the same thing, I think is just like, I think it'd be personally helpful because if you hear other people's stories and you can relate and understand, oh, I'm not the only one who's going through this. For the
right.
longest time, I thought I was the only one.
hmm
But hearing other people's stories has helped me realize, okay, this is just something people don't talk about, but that doesn't mean it's, you're the only one.
Right. Great. I mean, I just, heard that word support system, and I know a lot of people don't understand what that means. Can you just, give people more insight into what does a support system mean to you, and like, what it can mean to other people as well?
Sure. So I think when I think of a support system, I think of who is it in your life that can really help you. Whether it's parents, if you're in a relationship, someone who can help you, like your friends. It could even be, if you're close, like if you're in school, like your professors or maybe your colleagues, like anyone you feel comfortable talking to about what you're going through, and you feel that they would be able to support you in a non-biased and non-judgmental way. And I think also too, that could be like whether you have pets, like if your pet is like, gives you comfort. Like
hmm
I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a person. I
hmm
think it's just what can you like, who is in your life that gives you that sense of, okay, I feel calm, like, and I can get through whatever it is you're going through.
hmm Yeah, I mean, for me, I was struggling to find a support system, and for one, I didn't know what that meant. And for two, along the way, I realized, as I was doing therapy, my therapist was the first support system. And, and then I realized that, I could meet people on Meetup, through, mental health support groups. And, that's when I sort of started attending a lot more events through them. And, now I am hosting a bunch of events. So, now that I am in a safer mental health space, I feel like I have the luxury, and I also want to sort of give back in terms of creating a network where people can join in and be part of that conversation. So yeah, I mean, like it's hard to sort of uh, have that system, and the the other thing that sort of also came to my mind was like, when you say support, what does that mean to you? Like, how would you want people to support you? Or like, if people would expect support, what is an acceptable form of support? I don't mean to generalize this, but,
Sure.
and I don't want to get too specific either. You can feel free to say no, but, if there is something that you would like to share, please feel free to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I appreciate the question. I think for me, honestly, it's hard because trying to understand what support looks like is something I'm honestly still figuring out.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking with some friends the other day, we were talking about my anxiety and trying to figure out, how can they help? And sometimes you don't know. And I think like what I personally wish was that there was more resources, not only for people who are going through, mental health challenges, but also for people who, like are supporting those people, right? And so I think if there's a way to kind of for both ends have that support. So, I think unfortunately I don't know. And that's actually something I've been really wanting to figure out. And so I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's something a lot of people don't know the answer to.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, like, thank you for being honest about that. And for the longest time, I didn't understand that either. I was always like, I need help, but I don't know what that means to me. I didn't know what support meant. And the other problem that I've also seen is like, there are some boundaries which gets crossed when you try to ask for support. People tend to sort of get over involved, or people don't get involved enough, and you struggle with that sort of concept of forming those kind of relationships. So, and along the way, I've figured that the best way to learn is by doing, and you reach out to people, form suitable relationships, have different conversations, and if you make mistakes, accept that you made a mistake and apologize for it, and then try to build different relationships. So uh, I guess my advice is learn as you go, and be mindful that everybody is dealing with something, and uh, along the way you find great people who will want to stick around with you as well. So
I no, I agree with that. And a comment on that is I think that's where communication is very important. It's something that I think, especially for people who have those mental health challenges, it can really like make or break if someone's struggling in
hmm
terms of helping them get through it. And so I think that, like you said, establishing boundaries and really like I think it all comes down to communication,
hmm
saying this is what I expect, this is what's okay, what's not okay. And I think that's just something that, I really want to be more normalized. Like I think for the longest time it's like if you're in like being in business or just even like once you get outside of college, like I think there's less focus on mental health. Like in college there's so much focus on it, but
hmm
as a recent grad there's no focus, and I think that's when mental health is very challenging.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I hope that this conversation will make people more comfortable. I hope that this conversation will encourage one more person to acknowledge that they need help, and they will be more open about reaching out. So so glad you were part of this conversation. Thank you again for your time, and yeah, here's to better mental health for people around us.